All the young Apache woman wanted was a sham marriage. What she received was a cowboy's heart. The sun had barely risen over the small reservation town when Ahyoka stepped out of her family's modest home. The cold morning air nipped at her cheeks, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine from the nearby forest. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, thinking about the long day ahead. Life had never been easy for her family. Her father worked tirelessly as a laborer, and her mother spent hours tending the small garden behind their home. Every coin counted, and every day brought new worries about food, warmth, and survival. Ahyoka had learned early that family came first, and personal dreams often had to wait. Ahyoka's thoughts wandered to the upcoming winter. She knew that, without careful planning, the cold months could be harsh. The small cabin her family lived in was drafty, and their food supplies were thin. Her younger brother, Tyanita, often shivered at night despite the thick blankets her mother stitched. Her family's survival depended on sacrifices, and Ahyoka had already given many. She thought about school, which she loved but had little time for. She thought about friends, but her life was filled with chores and responsibility. Dreams of adventure, of love, or of freedom seemed far away. All she wanted was a way to help her family and keep them safe. The arrival of the matchmaker, a kindly older woman named Naya, changed everything. Naya was respected in the town for her knowledge of families, connections, and the ways of the world. She came to Ahyoka's home one crisp morning with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Ahyoka," she said softly, "your family situation worries me. I think I have a way to help you, and them too. You must hear me out." Ahyoka's heart sank. She had heard rumors of arranged marriages before, and the thought of marrying someone she barely knew made her uneasy. But she also knew that sometimes life demanded difficult choices. Naya spoke carefully, describing a man named Luke, a cowboy passing through their town. Luke was known for his honesty, strength, and hard-working nature. He owned little, yet he had a heart of gold and was respected wherever he went. The matchmaker explained that he was looking for a simple life and that a formal arrangement would benefit both him and Ahyoka's family. Ahyoka listened quietly, her mind racing. She had never met Luke, yet the idea of a sham marriage, a marriage for appearances and security, was both frightening and tempting. It promised shelter, stability, and protection for her family, and for that she felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Ahyoka's mother entered the room, her hands wringing a cloth nervously. She had always worried about her daughter, her heart heavy with the thought of losing her to the outside world. Yet, seeing the opportunity Naya presented, she also felt relief. This arrangement could secure their home, ensure food for winter, and protect Ahyoka from hardships she might otherwise face alone. With a deep breath, she nodded silently. Ahyoka's father, though quieter and stern, gave a small, approving smile. He trusted Naya's judgment and wanted to see his daughter safe. Despite her initial hesitation, Ahyoka felt the weight of duty settle on her shoulders. She knew what she must do. Days passed, and Ahyoka prepared for the journey to meet Luke. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, but she also felt a strange curiosity. Who was this man? What kind of life awaited her? She packed her few belongings carefully, including a small bundle of herbs her mother had dried and a necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Each item carried memories and protection, a connection to home and family. She wanted to honor her roots, even as she stepped into a future she could not fully imagine. The journey to Luke's cabin was long, but scenic. Ahyoka walked through forests where the sunlight filtered through branches, painting the earth in golden light. Birds sang in the trees, and the sound of a distant river filled the air. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this new life could hold something beyond duty. She thought of freedom not as escape, but as the chance to help her family, and perhaps to grow into a stronger version of herself. When Ahyoka finally arrived at Luke's cabin, she was struck by its simplicity. It was small, with sturdy wooden walls and a stone chimney that puffed gentle smoke into the crisp air. The cabin sat near the edge of the forest, offering a view of the rolling hills and a quiet, peaceful landscape. Luke appeared at the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered hat shading his eyes and a kind, cautious smile on his face. For a moment, Ahioka's heart skipped. He was nothing like the distant, cold men she had imagined in stories of arranged marriages. There was warmth in his presence and honesty she could feel without words. The first days were awkward. Ahioka and Luke spoke little, their interactions filled with polite gestures and careful movements. She noticed the way he tended to the cabin, chopping wood, mending fences, and caring for the small garden with dedication. He was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes. Ahioka found herself watching him with quiet fascination, noting the care he took in even the smallest details. She realized that maybe in this stranger there was more to life than she had imagined. Ahioka tried to maintain her resolve. She reminded herself that this was a sham marriage, that her heart must remain untouched, and that her focus should be on her family. Yet, every morning, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, she felt a subtle shift. There was comfort in Luke's steady presence, and even in the silence, a strange sense of companionship began to grow. She began to see that perhaps this arrangement could be more than survival. It could be a space for trust, respect, and maybe even quiet happiness. In the evenings, Ahioka would sit by the fireplace, weaving small baskets or preparing meals. Luke sometimes joined her, bringing fresh herbs or helping to start the fire. They spoke occasionally of simple things: the weather, the garden, the animals that passed by the cabin. Though brief, these conversations left Ahioka with a sense of peace she had not felt in a long time. She realized that trust was growing slowly, not through grand gestures, but in shared responsibilities and the quiet rhythm of daily life. Despite her initial fears, Ahioka began to see the cabin as a place of potential, not confinement. The forest beyond promised freedom, and Luke's presence promised safety and honesty. She learned small lessons from him: how to care for animals, how to tend a garden, how to face the challenges of life with patience and strength. And in turn, she shared knowledge of the land, of herbs, of traditional ways passed down by her family. Slowly, a bridge formed between them, a connection built on respect and shared purpose. By the end of her first month in the cabin, Ahioka no longer felt like an outsider. The initial fear had softened into cautious curiosity. She began to notice small things about Luke: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the care in his hands when he worked, the quiet laugh he offered on rare, unexpected moments. She wondered if perhaps life had given her more than security. Perhaps in this unlikely arrangement, there was the faint promise of something deeper. And though she still reminded herself of her duty to her family, a quiet hope had begun to grow in her heart. A hope that life might hold a surprise far beyond a simple sham marriage. And so, life in the cabin continued, with days of work and quiet conversation, with mornings bright with sunlight and evenings warm with firelight. Ahioka and Luke began their journey not as partners of love, but as two strangers bound by circumstance. Yet in the rhythm of daily life, in small gestures of care, and in the quiet observation of each other, a subtle unspoken bond began to form. Neither of them knew what the future held, but both began to feel that sometimes life's plans, no matter how carefully laid, could lead to something unexpected, beautiful, and entirely their own. The weeks after Ahioka settled into Luke's cabin passed in a rhythm of work, quiet moments, and subtle discoveries. At first, their days felt like a routine of survival: chopping wood, tending the small garden, repairing fences, and preparing meals. But slowly, life began to take on a richer texture. Ahioka noticed the little things that made Luke different from anyone she had ever met. He treated the animals with care, spoke gently to a stray dog that wandered near the cabin, and always offered his help without expecting praise. Even the way he listened when she spoke about herbs, plants, and traditional remedies made her feel respected. She had expected a cold, distant man, but Luke was patient, thoughtful, and quietly attentive. One morning, a heavy frost covered the ground, and the wind whipped sharply across the hills. Ahioka shivered as she stepped outside to check the garden, her breath forming small clouds in the icy air. Luke appeared behind her, carrying 2 baskets of firewood. "You'll freeze if you stay out here too long," he said, his voice steady and calm. Ahioka tried to smile, feeling warmth in his words. "I wanted to make sure the herbs survived the frost," she replied. Luke nodded, kneeling beside the plants to adjust protective coverings. She watched him, noticing the care in his movements. It struck her that he did not see these small tasks as burdens. He saw them as responsibility, and even more, as acts of respect for life. It made her heart stir in ways she did not understand. The quiet days began to bring conversations, small at first but gradually longer. They spoke about the river nearby, the forest animals, and stories from their pasts. Luke rarely shared much about himself, but when he did, it was simple and honest. He spoke of his travels, of the long days on horseback, of towns he had visited, and people he had met. Ahioka found herself fascinated, imagining a life so different from her own, yet seeing how much care and attention he put into each story. In return, she shared tales of her family, her heritage, and the ways of her people. She noticed that Luke listened with genuine interest, not just polite attention, and it made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. Then came the first real challenge, a winter storm that blew in unexpectedly, covering the hills in thick snow and ice. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the cabin's wooden walls, and Luke worked tirelessly to secure the roof and windows. Ahioka watched him, admiration mixing with worry. She had never seen anyone so determined to protect a place and someone with such quiet courage. When the storm worsened, they worked together, stacking firewood, clearing snow from the small paths, and making sure the animals had warmth. Side by side they moved as a team, and Ahioka realized that the partnership she had expected from the sham marriage had begun to take on a real sense of unity. Inside the cabin, the storm forced them into long hours together. They shared meals by the fire, brewed warm teas, and told stories to pass the time. At night, Ahioka lay awake, listening to the wind outside and the steady breathing of Luke across the room. She felt a strange comfort in knowing he was there, that he cared for her safety, even if she had not yet admitted to herself that she was beginning to care for him. She began noticing little gestures, how he left an extra blanket for her, how he quietly fixed a broken chair, how he would pause to check on her when she moved through the cabin. These actions, small as they seemed, left impressions on her heart that she tried to deny but could not. The storm passed, leaving a sparkling world of snow and ice outside. The cabin had survived, and life slowly returned to its daily rhythm. But something had shifted between Ahioka and Luke. They had seen each other at work and in care, had shared quiet fears and laughter, and had begun to trust one another more deeply. Ahioka found herself thinking about Luke when he was not around, wondering what he would do in the next challenge, and secretly hoping he would notice her small contributions around the cabin. She struggled with these thoughts, reminding herself that their marriage was only a formality, a sham, but the warmth growing between them was undeniable. One afternoon, a neighboring family came to ask for help. Their wagon had broken, and they needed assistance to move supplies before nightfall. Luke immediately offered to help, and Ahioka insisted on going with him, wanting to contribute. Together, they guided the wagon through rough terrain, navigating frozen mud and slippery slopes. Luke's strength and careful guidance impressed Ahioka, but she also noticed his patience and respect for the neighbors. He did not rush, did not scold, and treated everyone with fairness. Ahioka felt proud to be beside him, part of something bigger than herself, and even more proud to be learning from someone whose heart and actions spoke louder than words. During these outings, Ahioka began to see Luke's character more clearly. He was brave but not reckless, strong but not cruel, confident but humble. She realized that these qualities were rare, and she felt a pull in her heart she had not expected. Yet she was cautious. She reminded herself constantly that this was meant to be a sham marriage. Her dreams, her heart, and even her trust in love had to be protected. Still, each day spent with him chipped away at that resolve as trust and admiration grew in quiet, unnoticed ways. The small acts of kindness Luke showed began to extend to her family as well. When he came to visit her parents, he brought food, tools, and practical advice. They spoke with her father about work, with her mother about gardening, and with her brother about courage and skill. Ahayoka watched from a distance as he interacted with her family with respect and warmth. She realized that he was not only attentive to her but genuinely interested in the people she cared about most. It surprised her, touched her, and deepened her feelings in ways she could not fully name. She felt safe, seen, and valued, not just as a young woman in a marriage arrangement, but as a person with thoughts, ideas, and worth. One evening, after a long day of tending the garden and preparing the cabin for an approaching cold front, Ahioka and Luke sat outside looking at the stars. The sky stretched endlessly, dotted with tiny points of light, and the air was crisp and quiet. Luke handed her a cup of warm tea, and for the first time, Ahioka felt comfortable enough to speak honestly. "I never expected life to be like this," she said softly. Luke nodded, looking at the stars. "I didn't either," he admitted. "Sometimes life surprises you in ways you don't plan for." Ahioka felt a connection in those words, a sense that he understood more than he let on. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what life could be like if they worked together not just out of necessity, but out of care. As the weeks turned into months, the quiet bond between them deepened. Ahioka began to see Luke not just as a man providing safety, but as someone whose presence brought comfort and stability. She began to laugh more easily around him, share more freely, and even tease him in small ways. Luke, in turn, began to notice her courage, intelligence, and humor. He admired the way she faced challenges, how she cared for the cabin, the animals, and even the forest that surrounded them. Slowly, he began to imagine a life where her presence was not temporary, where her smile, her voice, and her steady determination became a part of his everyday world. Yet, despite these feelings, the boundaries of the sham marriage remained. Ahioka reminded herself constantly that this was not love, that her heart had to remain guarded, and that her family's safety was the priority. But each day spent with Luke made it harder to deny the warmth, the comfort, and the subtle pull she felt toward him. And for Luke, too, the arrangement that had seemed simple and temporary began to take on new meaning. The more time he spent with Ahioka, the more he realized that this partnership, forged by necessity, was slowly becoming something far more profound. One afternoon, as they repaired the fence along the edge of the forest, a deer appeared in the distance, frozen and cautious. Ahioka and Luke watched in silence, marveling at the delicate beauty of the animal. "It's moments like this," Luke said softly, "that make life worth the struggle." Ahioka nodded, feeling an echo of that sentiment in her heart. The quiet companionship, the shared responsibilities, and the small joys of daily life were weaving a bond neither had expected, and though neither spoke of it yet, the seeds of something real, trust, admiration, and perhaps love, were quietly taking root. By the time the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Ahioka and Luke had moved from polite strangers to reliable companions, sharing tasks, stories, and small joys. Their days were filled with laughter, mutual respect, and a growing understanding of one another's strengths and character. Ahioka began to realize that while she had come to the cabin expecting a simple, practical arrangement, life had given her unexpected lessons in trust, care, and companionship. And in her heart she felt a quiet, unspoken hope that perhaps the connection they had built could be something more than convenience, something worth cherishing and protecting. Spring had arrived in the hills around Luke's cabin, painting the world in fresh greens and soft blooms. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of wildflowers and tiny streams that had been hidden under ice. Ahioka found herself waking each morning to birdsong and the gentle smell of damp earth, feeling both excitement and apprehension about the changes this season might bring. Life had settled into a rhythm with Luke. They worked together in the garden, repaired fences, and explored the nearby woods. Yet, the quiet comfort of their daily lives was about to be tested in ways neither of them expected. It began with the arrival of travelers from a neighboring town. A small group of families, burdened by crop failures and harsh weather, sought guidance and assistance. Luke, ever responsible, immediately offered his help. Ahioka insisted on joining him, seeing it as a chance to support her family indirectly, and to contribute meaningfully to their neighbors' needs. They rode together through muddy paths and low streams, guiding wagons, carrying supplies, and offering encouragement. Ahioka noticed how natural Luke was with people, how he listened, how he remained patient, how he balanced strength with gentleness. She admired him quietly, feeling a warmth that went beyond gratitude or respect. During this journey, an accident occurred. One of the wagons struck a hidden rock, and the cart tipped, spilling supplies into a shallow creek. Water soaked through bundles of food and blankets, leaving the families worried and frustrated. Luke did not panic. Calmly, he waded into the cold water, lifting each bundle carefully while Ahioka assisted him. She felt her hands tremble, both from the icy water and from watching his steady courage. He smiled at her briefly, acknowledging her help with a gentle nod, and for a moment her heart fluttered. She realized how deeply she was beginning to depend on him, not just for safety, but for reassurance, strength, and guidance. Once the supplies were secured, they continued to the town, where they found that other families needed similar help. Over several days, Ahioka and Luke worked tirelessly, helping repair homes, deliver provisions, and organize shelter for those in need. Through it all, they grew closer. Ahioka noticed the quiet ways Luke paid attention to her, how he handed her tools when needed, how he checked if she was tired, how he seemed to notice every detail of her efforts. She, in turn, found herself looking for ways to support him, anticipating his needs, and quietly worrying if he pushed himself too hard. For the first time, the distinction between duty and care became blurred in her mind. One evening, after a long day, they rested on the edge of a hill, watching the sun dip behind distant ridges. The sky glowed in shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. Ahioka's hands were dirty from work, and her cheeks were flushed from exertion. Luke handed her a cloth to wipe her hands and smiled softly. "You've done more than I expected," he said, his voice low and sincere. Ahioka felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wanted to tell him she felt the same about him, that she admired his courage and care, but the words caught in her throat. She remembered the agreement, the sham marriage, and reminded herself that her heart was not meant to wander yet. But life rarely waits for careful plans. That night, a sudden illness struck one of the families they had helped. The youngest child, barely 5 years old, developed a high fever and could barely speak. Luke acted quickly, using knowledge he had learned from traveling with doctors and midwives. Ahioka assisted, fetching herbs, preparing compresses, and offering calm words to the frightened parents. Hours passed, and Luke worked tirelessly, adjusting the child's blanket, checking the fever, and gently guiding Ahioka through the remedies. She felt a deep respect for his knowledge and patience. And yet, she also felt a growing pull in her heart, a realization that she had begun to care for him in ways she could not control. As the night wore on, they finally managed to stabilize the child. The parents expressed heartfelt gratitude, tears streaming down their faces. Ahioka watched Luke, exhausted but composed, and felt a strange combination of admiration, relief, and something more tender. Something that made her heartbeat quicken. That night, lying in the cabin, she reflected on how much she had learned about him in just a few weeks. His courage, his quiet strength, his kindness, all of it had changed the way she saw the world. The simple arrangement she had agreed to felt insufficient to describe what she now experienced. The following days brought another challenge. A sudden fire broke out in the woods near the cabin, caused by a lightning strike. Flames spread quickly, and the wind threatened to carry them closer to homes. Luke and Ahioka acted without hesitation. Together they guided neighbors, helped extinguish small fires, and created fire breaks to protect the cabin and surrounding land. Ahioka had never felt such fear, yet in Luke's presence she felt grounded. His calm decisiveness gave her strength, and she realized that her feelings were no longer simple admiration. They were becoming something deeper. During one moment of respite as they sat near the river to rest and hydrate, Ahioka spoke quietly. "I never thought life could feel so alive," she admitted. Luke glanced at her, his expression gentle. "Life has a way of teaching us when we least expect it," he replied. Ahioka noticed the care in his eyes, the unspoken concern for her well-being, and her heart responded with warmth she could no longer ignore. The boundaries of their sham marriage, once so clear, began to blur. She began to realize that the man she had intended to simply live alongside might be someone she could truly care for. Then came a misunderstanding that would shake the fragile trust between them. A traveler passing through town spread rumors about the nature of their marriage. Some suggested that Ahioka and Luke were romantically involved beyond the sham agreement, while others whispered that Ahioka was taking advantage of Luke's kindness. Ahioka felt her heart sink. She had always been cautious, and now the town's opinions threatened to unsettle the careful balance she and Luke had maintained. She worried about her family, about her reputation, and about what Luke might think of her. Luke, however, did not hesitate. He confronted the travelers calmly but firmly, defending Ahioka's honor and making it clear that he valued her not just as a partner in convenience, but as someone worthy of respect. Ahioka watched him speak, feeling both relief and a surge of emotion she could not name. In that moment she realized that Luke's care for her was genuine, unwavering, and unselfish. He was not just a protector in action. He had become a protector of her heart, her dignity, and her sense of self. After the confrontation, the two of them returned to the cabin in silence. Ahioka felt a mix of fear, gratitude, and something she could no longer deny. She had expected a simple arrangement, a marriage of convenience. Instead, she had found someone whose heart and character had quietly touched her own. Luke noticed her quiet tension and placed a reassuring hand on hers. The simple gesture spoke volumes. Words were unnecessary. Ahioka's heart responded with warmth, and she allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Realizing that her feelings for Luke were more than respect or admiration, they were deep, personal, and undeniable. Life returned slowly to its rhythm, but the shift had occurred. Ahioka began to see Luke differently. She noticed the way he cared for the animals, the way he adjusted the cabin for comfort, and the quiet attention he paid to her thoughts and feelings. Each action, small as it seemed, left a lasting impression on her heart. And Luke, too, could not ignore the feelings that had been growing inside him. He admired her courage, intelligence, and humor. He found himself looking forward to their shared work, their quiet moments, and even the small disagreements that revealed her strong will. By the end of the spring, Ahioka and Luke had faced challenges together that neither could have imagined when they first agreed to the sham marriage. The illness, the fire, and the rumors had tested their resilience, patience, and courage. But through these trials, they discovered something unexpected. A bond built not on convenience or necessity, but on trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences. The line between duty and affection had blurred, and both began to understand that their hearts were no longer untouched by the other. One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ahioka and Luke sat together on a log outside the cabin, watching the sky change colors. Ahioka felt a warmth she could no longer deny, a tenderness she had tried to keep hidden. She realized that the man she had married for security had become someone she cared for deeply. Luke, noticing her gaze, reached for her hand and held it gently. Neither spoke for a long moment. Words were unnecessary. The silence carried the weight of what had grown between them. For Ahioka, the sham marriage had become something far greater than she had ever expected. She had arrived seeking safety and stability, and instead she found courage, trust, and the first tender stirrings of love. For Luke, the arrangement had begun as a simple duty, but now he understood that he had discovered a partner, a companion, and perhaps the beginnings of something far more meaningful. And as the stars appeared overhead, twinkling faintly in the evening sky, both knew that life had shifted irrevocably. The path ahead was uncertain, but the connection they had forged through trials, care, and shared moments had become a foundation strong enough to weather any challenge. The turning point had come, and neither could ignore the truth any longer. Their hearts had begun to change, quietly and inevitably, in ways that would shape the future of their lives forever. The warmth of spring had faded into the hotter days of early summer, and with the change in season, the forests around the cabin grew dense, the air thick with humidity, and the river swelled from recent rains. making travel and chores more difficult. Ahioka and Luke worked side by side, tending to the garden, repairing fences and keeping the cabin safe from the rising heat and occasional storms. Yet despite their growing closeness, an undercurrent of unease had begun to creep into Ahioka's heart. She loved the rhythm of their shared work and the comfort of Luke's presence, but she was also aware of the whispers in town and the limitations of their arrangement. The sham marriage, which had once seemed simple and practical, now felt fragile against the growing feeling she could no longer ignore. Ahioka found herself thinking constantly about Luke, wondering if he felt the same way she did. She watched him as he worked, noticing the small gestures of care he offered not just to her, but to the land, the animals, and the neighbors they assisted. Each action reminded her that he was a man of deep character, and she found herself drawn to him more than ever. Yet fear held her back. She worried about what would happen if she admitted her feelings. What if he did not feel the same? What if her heart was exposed, vulnerable, and rejected? She spent nights awake staring at the darkened ceiling of the cabin, struggling to reconcile her growing love with the reality of the sham marriage they had agreed to. Luke, for his part, sensed a shift in Ahioka's mood but did not press her. He respected her quiet nature and understood that matters of the heart could not be forced. Still, he could not deny his own emotions. Each day spent with her deepened his admiration and affection. He watched the way she cared for the animals, tended to the plants, and approached every challenge with courage and intelligence. He heard her laugh, sometimes at his own clumsy attempts at humor, and felt an unexpected thrill in the sound. He knew the arrangement was supposed to be temporary, practical, and without romance, yet he found his heart quietly leaning toward her, hoping for a bond that was more than convenience. The first true test of their trust came when a traveling merchant arrived at the cabin, offering tools, supplies, and news from the towns beyond. Among his news were stories of marriages gone wrong, families torn apart by misunderstanding, and rumors that spread faster than truth. The merchant, unaware of the delicate nature of Ahioka and Luke's arrangement, commented carelessly on their relationship, implying that Ahioka might be taking advantage of Luke's kindness. Ahioka felt her chest tighten. She had worked so hard to maintain her dignity and protect her heart, and now the careless words threatened to unravel the balance she had fought to keep. Luke noticed the change in her immediately. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she sorted the merchant's supplies, and her eyes darted toward the window as if seeking escape. He approached her quietly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Do not let what he says disturb you," he said softly. "I trust you, and I know your heart." "Nothing he says changes that."
Ahioka felt a surge of relief at his words, but also a deeper conflict. She wanted to believe him completely, yet part of her feared that the outside world's opinions would eventually intrude upon their fragile connection.
The weight of expectation, duty, and gossip pressed heavily on her, reminding her that love and trust were never simple. A few days later, Luke received news that a distant relative needed assistance with a ranch in trouble from flooding. He prepared to leave for several days, and Ahioka felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She knew it was the right thing for him to help, yet the thought of being alone in the cabin, surrounded by the quiet of the forest and the lingering heat, left her uneasy. She busied herself with chores, tending to the garden, repairing fences, and caring for the animals, but every task felt heavier without him nearby. For the first time, she realized just how much she had come to rely on his presence, not just for safety and companionship, but for emotional support as well. During Luke's absence, Ahioka faced challenges that tested her courage and independence. A sudden summer storm hit the area, bringing fierce winds, heavy rain, and falling branches that threatened the cabin. Alone, she struggled to secure the roof and reinforce the walls. Her hands were scraped and bruised, her clothes soaked through, yet she refused to give in to fear. She remembered everything Luke had taught her, the way to tie knots, secure beams, and create barriers against the wind. Each action was deliberate, guided by knowledge and determination. By the time the storm passed, the cabin had survived intact, and Ahioka had proved to herself that she was stronger than she had realized. Yet amid her triumph, she felt a pang of loneliness, wishing that Luke had been there to face the storm by her side. When Luke finally returned, he found Ahioka exhausted but smiling, standing outside the cabin as the last rays of sun touched the hills. He approached silently, taking in the sight of her dirt-streaked face and tired posture. "You did well," he said, his voice filled with both admiration and concern. Ayoka's lips curved into a tired smile. "I had to," she replied softly. "It was the only way." Luke took her hand, feeling the calluses and scratches from her labor, and a mixture of pride and affection welled in his chest. He realized in that moment that her strength, courage, and resilience were as remarkable as her kindness and warmth. The days that followed brought a new challenge: tension with the town. Rumors about Ahioka and Luke's relationship had spread further than they realized. Some neighbors whispered that Ahioka was exploiting the cowboys' good nature, while others suggested that Luke had compromised his reputation. Ahioka tried to ignore the chatter, focusing on her duties, but each whisper, glance, and judgmental stare chipped away at her confidence. She felt torn between wanting to protect her heart and wanting to defend Luke's honor. The weight of societal expectation pressed heavily, making her question whether the bond she felt with Luke could survive scrutiny. Luke, sensing her distress, remained her steadfast ally. He spoke to the neighbors calmly, emphasizing the respect, trust, and care that defined their relationship. He did not seek to justify themselves unnecessarily, but his quiet strength reassured Ahioka. She began to understand that trust, both in love and life, required courage, not just in facing challenges together, but in standing firm against judgment and misunderstanding. Slowly, she felt her confidence return, bolstered by his unwavering support. Even as they faced these external pressures, their personal bond deepened. They shared quiet moments in the evenings, sitting by the fire and speaking of hopes, dreams, and memories. Ahioka told Luke stories of her childhood, of her parents' struggles and lessons, and of traditions that had been passed down through generations. Luke, in turn, shared tales from his travels, moments of adventure, and reflections on the people he had met along the way. These stories allowed them to see each other fully, not just as partners in survival, but as individuals with hearts, fears, and dreams. Yet amid this closeness, Ahioka struggled with a growing internal conflict. She realized that she could no longer ignore the feelings that had begun to take root in her heart. She admired Luke, trusted him, and even longed for his presence in ways that went beyond simple companionship. But fear and duty held her back. She worried about disrupting the fragile balance of their lives, about exposing her heart to vulnerability, and about the consequences of giving in to love. Nights were especially hard, as she lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest and imagining what might happen if she confessed her feelings. Luke, too, wrestled with his emotions. He admired Ahioka's courage, her intelligence, and the quiet strength that guided her actions. He cherished her humor, her compassion, and the way she faced challenges with determination. But he also feared misreading her signals, of overstepping the boundaries of their arrangement, and of placing her in a position of discomfort or risk. He had come to care for her deeply, yet the uncertainty of her feelings and the weight of the outside world's judgments left him cautious. The tension between duty, societal expectations, and burgeoning love created a silent pressure that neither could ignore. Every shared task, every gesture of care, every conversation carried a weight beyond the immediate moment. Ahioka found herself noticing the smallest details about Luke, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the quiet steadiness of his hands, the way he seemed to understand her without needing words. Luke, in turn, became attuned to her moods, her thoughts, and the unspoken desires behind her actions. They were bound together not just by necessity, but by trust, respect, and the subtle, undeniable pull of growing affection. One afternoon, a misunderstanding arose when a neighbor mistook Ahioka's careful tending of the garden as a sign of romantic attachment, spreading further gossip. Ahioka felt her chest tighten with anxiety, unsure how Luke would respond. But he remained calm, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder and quietly reaffirming his trust. "Do not let the world's words shake you," he said. "I know your heart, and I trust it completely." Ahioka felt tears prick her eyes, not of sadness but of relief, gratitude, and the first deep sense that she was truly seen and understood. By the end of this long and challenging summer, Ahioka and Luke had faced both external trials and internal struggles that tested their strength, courage, and trust. The sham marriage that had once been simple and practical had grown into a bond filled with unspoken emotions, quiet admiration, and deepening love. Yet the journey was far from over. Both knew that their feelings could no longer be ignored, and that the next step, acknowledging the truth of their hearts, would require courage greater than any challenge they had faced so far. The summer heat began to soften into the gentle warmth of early autumn. The hills around Luke's cabin glowed with shades of gold and orange, and the air carried the sweet scent of ripening fruits and fallen leaves. Life had settled into a rhythm, but the bond between Ahioka and Luke had reached a tipping point. Both had grown from cautious companions into two people who cared deeply for each other, though neither had yet fully spoken the truths of their hearts. The challenges of the past months, the storms, the illness, the rumors, had tested them in ways that revealed their courage, resilience, and the depth of their connection. Yet now, with the world quieter and calmer, the time had come to face the most important challenge of all: honesty. Ahioka spent her mornings in the garden, carefully tending the herbs and vegetables that sustained them. She often caught herself glancing toward Luke, who worked on repairing a section of the fence near the edge of the forest. There was a rhythm to his movements, steady and sure, and she felt an almost magnetic pull toward him. Her heart had grown too full to ignore, and she realized that the feelings she had fought to contain for months were no longer simple admiration. They were love. But fear lingered, as it always had. She worried that confessing her feelings could disrupt the fragile harmony they had built, that it might scare him away, or worse, that it could leave her vulnerable to heartbreak. Luke, meanwhile, had begun to notice the subtle signs of Ahioka's feelings. The way her eyes lingered when he spoke, the gentle smile that appeared when he entered the room, the careful attention she gave to the smallest tasks, all spoke of a heart that had quietly leaned toward his. He felt a similar tug in his own chest, a longing he could no longer ignore. Yet he, too, hesitated. How could he express his feelings without frightening her? How could he make sure she understood that his care was genuine and lasting, not merely a product of their arrangement? For days he wrestled with his own emotions, uncertain how to bridge the silence between them. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, a young neighbor came running to the cabin, breathless and frightened. A small wildfire had broken out near the forest edge, likely caused by dry leaves and a spark from a passing wagon. Luke and Ahioka sprang into action without hesitation, gathering buckets of water, shovels, and blankets. They worked side by side, running to and fro, extinguishing flames before they could spread to the nearby fields or homes. The fire tested their teamwork and their endurance, pushing them to the limits of strength and courage. Yet through the chaos, something remarkable happened. They moved with a seamless understanding, anticipating each other's actions, and relying on one another completely. After hours of battling the fire, they finally succeeded in containing it. Both were exhausted, their clothes torn and stained, their skin streaked with soot and sweat. They collapsed together on a grassy hill overlooking the smoldering remnants of the forest, breathing heavily and watching as the last traces of smoke vanished into the evening sky. For the first time, Ahioka allowed herself to speak the words she had kept hidden for so long. "Luke, I think I was wrong to try and guard my heart," she said, her voice trembling but steady. I can't stop feeling for you. I care for you, more than I ever imagined I would." Luke turned to her, his eyes softening, filled with the warmth she had come to love. "Ahioka," he said gently, taking her hand in his, "I feel the same way. From the moment we started this, from the first days in this cabin, I realized there was something extraordinary about you. I've tried to keep my heart steady, but I can't anymore. I care for you too, deeply, more than I thought possible." Relief and joy flooded Ahioka's chest, and for a long moment they simply sat there, holding hands, letting the quiet of the evening carry their emotions. The next days were filled with a new sense of understanding and harmony. Ahioka and Luke spoke openly about their feelings, their hopes, and their fears. They laughed at their previous hesitations, shared stories of how they had struggled to hide their emotions, and promised to face the future together, honestly and openly. The sham marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into a true partnership built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Each day became a celebration of not just survival, but companionship and shared happiness. Their families noticed the change, though they had suspected it for some time. Ahioka's parents visited the cabin and found the two of them working together, laughing and caring for one another. Initially, they had been cautious, worried about the complications of a sham marriage evolving into something more. But seeing the genuine affection and respect between Ahioka and Luke, their hearts softened. Her parents realized that what had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into a bond that would strengthen both their daughter and the cowboy she had grown to love. They offered blessings, smiles, and small gifts, acknowledging the transformation that had taken place in the cabin on the hills. Luke's respect for Ahioka's heritage and wisdom deepened as well. He listened to her stories of family traditions, learned the uses of herbs she taught him, and shared in her cultural practices with genuine interest and care. Ahioka, in turn, appreciated his curiosity, his willingness to learn, and his humility. Together, they built a life that was both respectful of the past and hopeful for the future. A balance neither had expected when their marriage had begun as a simple arrangement. As the seasons changed, the bond between Ahioka and Luke strengthened further. They worked together to improve the cabin, expand the garden, and help neighbors in need. Their love was no longer quiet or unspoken. It became the foundation of every choice, every action, and every shared moment. Villagers and travelers alike noticed the harmony in their relationship, the respect they showed one another, and the quiet joy that radiated from their daily lives.
What had begun as a practical agreement now stood as an example of trust, perseverance, and genuine affection.
One afternoon, as the golden light of autumn filtered through the trees, Ahioka and Luke sat by the river that ran behind the cabin. The water glimmered in the sunlight, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. Luke took Ahioka's hand in both of his and looked into her eyes. "I never imagined that a sham marriage could lead to this," he said, his voice warm and steady. "But I am grateful every day that it did. You are more than I could have hoped for, Ahioka. You are my partner, my equal, and my heart." Ahioka smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "And you are mine," she whispered. "I came here to protect my family, but what I found was something far greater, a heart I never expected, a heart I never thought I would give." The evening stretched on with quiet conversation, laughter, and shared stories. They spoke of future plans, of dreams they could pursue together, and of the home they would continue to build. The hardships of the past, storms, fires, illness, and rumors, were no longer burdens but reminders of their resilience and shared strength. Each challenge had drawn them closer, teaching them patience, courage, and the true value of trust. And now, as the stars appeared overhead, they felt certain that their bond could weather any future challenge. The story of Ahioka and Luke became known throughout the nearby towns and villages. People admired the way the young Apache woman and the cowboy had transformed a practical arrangement into a true partnership. Their story inspired others to look beyond appearances, to value character, integrity, and the quiet power of love built on respect and shared experience. Ahioka and Luke, however, cared little for fame or recognition. Their focus was their life together: the cabin, the garden, the animals, and each other. Every day was an opportunity to deepen their connection, support one another, and cherish the love that had grown quietly, patiently, and inevitably.
As autumn gave way to winter once again, Ahioka and Luke sat by the fire in their cabin, watching the first snowflakes drift from the sky.
They held hands, their hearts full, their spirits calm, and their minds at peace. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that they would face them together. The sham marriage, which had begun as a simple solution to practical problems, had become a source of joy, love, and mutual respect. In the quiet of the cabin, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the enduring strength of their bond, Ahioka realized that she had received far more than she had ever hoped for. She had received a heart, a cowboy's heart, full of love, courage, and devotion. And so their story closed not with a dramatic ending, but with the quiet certainty of hearts joined by trust, resilience, and love. Ahioka and Luke had navigated the trials of life together, discovered the depth of their feelings, and embraced a future built not on convenience, but on honest, enduring affection. Their journey from a practical arrangement to a heartfelt partnership became a testament to the power of patience, courage, and the unexpected ways that life can transform the ordinary into something extraordinary.